Welcome to Grit and Gravitas with Ann and Annie, bringing you savvy, spirited stories of success. We're excited to deliver 30 minutes of inspiration, impact, and goodness. We'll be bringing you guests and friends from around the country who have very special work and personal journeys. I'm Deeter Gallaher, your co-host with Annie Carnathan, and this is Grit and Gravitas. Let's go! Welcome to the Grit and Gravitas podcast studio. Annie Carnathan, it's always a joy. And even a greater joy, we have an incredible guest. I know we say that every episode.
Well, they all are, though.
But it's true. We have one of my early Twitter connections who I'm going to call a friend. I have learned so much from you, Whitney Johnson. Welcome to the virtual Pennsylvania studio from the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you, Ann, and I'm happy to be here. And I love that you both said every guest is a great guest, because that's how you should feel, right? If you're going to spend an hour with someone, you need to feel like every guest is your favorite.
You do. And I think our curiosity, we're always learning and wanting to meet new people. And so we're genuinely love our guests. And I think that's evident not only in the video, but the audio. Is that true?
Well, yes, and you're voting with your time.
Yes.
Which is non-renewable. And look, Whitney, you could be doing a myriad of other things, and you're choosing to take, this time with us. So again, heartfelt thank you. And we're excited for our listeners, but we're mostly excited for ourselves to get to do this.
Yes, yes. So Whitney, you have, actually our last 4 guests have written books, and you are no exception. I think actually yours is the most recently published of our last few guests. Smart Growth, How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. And you are what I consider a big thinker, and I know that's true on the global stage as well. And you've built an entire business around personal disruption. And I pulled up on Twitter before today's recording, I tweeted a long ago blog post that I shared, and you posted on your site from 2013. So I think I am grateful for Twitter friendships and Twitter relationships. I can't believe it's been that long. But it was about disruption then. And so this is book number 4. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good. And so tell us a little bit about Smart Growth, the S-curve. Both Annie and I dove into that, but we want to hear about, what was your purpose in writing that?
Yeah. Before I do that, I want to just make you gave me this memory around Twitter. Do you remember when we all first got on Twitter, and then we would make Twitter friends?
Yes.
And then we would meet someone. I remember someone talking about, she called it twirl, like Twitter in real life. And just the thrill it was to have felt like we had a connection with someone online and then to meet each other in person. It was so exciting. Do you remember that feeling?
I totally do. And that's one of the early draws for Twitter. I got on in 2009, and now look where it is now. And actually this week is a pretty big week for Twitter. But it was almost like going to executive education, and then you would fly. I have bought plane tickets and flown to meet in real life, my Twitter connections, and have done business with several of those. So it is, and having you come full circle with us today, we're beyond honored. You don't look a day over, 2013 when we were tweeting together. So kudos, but you're 4 books in now. So tell us a little bit about this whole disruption model.
Yes. All right. So the book, Smart Growth, How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, as you said, it's my 4th book, but it's the 3rd book in a series. And the first book in this series was titled Disrupt Yourself. And this is a framework or a model that I developed after co-founding the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School. And we were looking for investments that we thought would upend a market. Like Netflix did to Blockbuster. Mm-hmm. But the big aha for me was that disruption wasn't just about products and services and companies and countries, but it was also, and more fundamentally, about the individual, that companies cannot disrupt unless people do.
Right.
Now, in that book, both Disrupt Yourself and my second book, Build an A-Team, I had the S curve of learning, which is another aha that I had in the investing was that the S curve that we were using, again, to look at how innovations will be adopted, applying it to the individual, I think this S curve could also help us understand how individuals change, what growth looks like. But in those first two books, the S curve was really in the background. It was like a backup singer. It was running, but it wasn't front and center. But I listened to the market. People were reflecting back to me. They were telling me what was sticky for them. And I discovered that people were saying, okay, I understand disruption is the mechanism by which you grow. But what I'm curious about is this S curve seems to be a way for me to think about growth. It's a map of growth. And when people kept saying, I want more of that, I realized I need to write a book about this, where the S curve isn't the backup singer, it's the lead singer, and really to dive deep and give people this map and model of what growth looks like. Because once you understand what growth looks like, the more you can grow.
No, totally. Did you find, I'm curious about the timing of this book. Had you planned this, or did the pandemic just, release,
accelerate?
Yes, your story. And did you discover like so many people were more now willing to disrupt themselves or explore a totally different path?
Well, of course, I did not plan it. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And to answer your question, yes. So two things happened. Number one is that when the pandemic came, we were all disrupted. And so the question was, how are we going to navigate this? And so my work became especially timely because people realized the only way I'm going to manage through disruption is if I'm willing to disrupt myself, because that's the only thing I have control over. So that was the first piece is, okay, this accelerates the need and sort of the desperation to understand how can we move forward. But then building on that, coming out of the pandemic, what we know from psychologists is that in order or after a period of severe stress, like a pandemic, there is typically tremendous growth, and psychologists call it post-traumatic growth. And so what I have found is that as we're moving into this, I would say we're currently in the pre-post pandemic, is people are ready to grow. They want to grow. They're not quite sure what that's going to look like. And so the S curve of learning provides a map, a mental model to think about, okay, this is what it looks like. So I know I want to do it, and this is going to help me figure out how to do it.
Right. No, that's fascinating.
One of the biggest fascinations in your book, Whitney, was how people who become successful at what they do begin to get restless and they begin to get bored. And without conjuring up Mr. Blah that breaks my heart, it seems to me to answer how, for myself, for instance, there's always another mountain to conquer. And when you said when you become successful and when you've arrived at that goal, it frees up headspace. Yeah. There's the capability, there's the ability to sort of look up and go, okay, what now? Right? I have some space up there. I'm a little bit bored. I'm a little bit restless. And I thought of not necessarily even conceptually, I think that's really hard for people to get their arms around who aren't like that. Because it's sort of why are you never satisfied? Why would you take that risk? Why wouldn't you just do what you've always done? You're very successful. And I thought that was the sort of moxie that described to me the why for the way I've always been. And that to me was really difficult for you to get to. Maybe not. Was it hard to describe that?
It's a great question, Annie. I don't know. I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can answer that question. I think what I can answer is that it was nice for me to. I had this intuition around this, and I think sometimes we do this is we have these intuitions, but we can't quite explain them. And so it was a relief for me to be able to say, oh, now I understand what's going on. So I've got my brain and it runs these predictive models. And at the launch point of an S curve of learning, the dopamine's dropping because all my predictions are inaccurate. But what happens when I get to the top of that S curve is that my predictions are all accurate. And if everything's accurate, it's like playing, a major C on the piano, like there's no tension to it. It's not interesting. So your dopamine's kind of flat. And it was really almost a relief for me to be able to say, now I understand what's going on, is that my brain is saying, I need dopamine. This reminder that we are wired to grow, that growth is our default setting, and this sense of relief around that, of why, like you said, you can be really good at something and feel like, I can't keep doing this because my brain is saying, I need dopamine. You've got to find a way to grow.
And she's brilliant. I'm just sorry, because she used the word intuition.
Yes.
With psychology. That was my aha moment, Whitney. And that answered my why, because it's a spectator in a sporting event or the person playing in it. I was never nervous playing in it. I'm very, very nervous watching it because I can't impact the outcome. And so I thought, well, if somebody looks back, how did you risk that? I never thought of it that way. Not that I haven't made mistakes, not that I haven't leaped before I looked or would have done something different in retrospect, but I don't have any regrets. And so you add dopamine to intuition, like that's the brew. Yeah. That's the concoction. And it helped me a lot.
Well, right. And Annie, what I just heard you say is the question for you was how could I not, right? Because if you didn't,
touche, right,
you would stagnate and you would die.
I would have no purpose.
Right. So how could you not?
I think our own little example of disruption, so our explorer stage and taking off, I won't say master yet. When we embarked on this podcast, Whitney, this was Annie's brainchild, and we worked together as in client-partner relationship. And we ended up having every meeting, it just went long and long. And I would say, I think this. And she'd say, well, I don't really see it that way. And finally she said, do you want to do a podcast? And I thought, oh, okay, yes, I'm not quite sure where that path leads, and I don't know what it all entails. And it was a major disruption in the best possible way. But we were both willing to say, and there probably was dopamine involved. I was like, wow, this is something totally out of my comfort zone. And we're going to go down this path, and never thought that it wouldn't be great because we would be learning together. But I think that's our own little example while we're running companies. So the S curve has a couple different meanings, for how you grow, either grow yourself or then lead by example for your team. Your entire team is watching. Annie's got a lot more employees than I do.
Grow or go?
Well, there. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. I like it.
So explain, Whitney, more on the S curve. So what are all the phases of the S curve?
Yeah. I want to just pick up on one thing you said, and then
Yes.
I'll explain the phases.
Yes.
I just think
Please.
I think it's interesting, something that you said about your collaborating on this podcast, which is whenever I think about a good collaboration, in my mind's eye, I have a person on one side of the river and the other person's on the other side of the river. And you couldn't do it, Annie, you couldn't do this podcast by yourself, and Anne, you couldn't do by yourself. The only way this podcast works is you somehow intellectually and emotionally have to build a bridge across the river. And it's the building of that bridge that makes a great collaboration. Do you agree with that?
Totally.
It's trust, it's foundational, it's fundamental, and I judge people largely by intent because nobody's perfect. We all would take things back that we said or the way we said them, and that wasn't my intention, and here's what I really intended to say. And I think the trust of the both of us having completely different styles, but very, very aligned philosophically, fundamentally. We just come in here, and someone said to me the other day who just started listening, you sound like you have so much fun. And I said, it's because we do.
Yeah.
And what we have discovered has been joyous
Right.
at this point.
And it's learning, it's meeting people like yourself that apart, we wouldn't be meeting or exploring. Annie's brought in many of the guests that I had never met before. I'm bringing in people that she hadn't met and just enlarging our circle of influence. And I think that's really the beauty of social media for all, of its failings. I think the ability, and again, when you talk about dopamine and learning S curves and exploring new territory, I think the Twitter community for me, or social media in many aspects, kept relationships going when the pandemic was, when you couldn't really get the dopamine effect. If you're a big thinker and you're a creator, and now all of a sudden you're just, at home in your den doing this, you miss. I know for our team, we desperately miss getting together, whether it's a water cooler conversation, the kind of energy, throwing ideas off of each other. It's hard to replicate in an email thread or a Teams meeting, so I think we have a new sense of energy created by our going down this path.
And I think Whitney's S curve gave sort of a process to me that was just, for me, lightning in a bottle. It just was sort of this.
There you go.
Sort of wacky, crazy, mad scientist blowing up things in the lab that I knew, but no one else could know. And I really believe you gave not just a thought process to that, you gave an intuitive process to that, which I very, very much valued.
Okay, so with that, I will explain the different phases of the S curve. So I think one of the things that I think is why I like it, apart from the fact that it's somewhat my brainchild, is the fact that it is so simple and so visual, it makes it useful. And you just intimated, Annie, it allows you to have a conversation with someone and to speak the same language of growth. So there are three major phases. There's the launch point, there's the sweet spot, there's the mastery. And as I mentioned in the launch point, the predictions, dopamine's dropping, and so it feels like growth is slow. In the sweet spot, your dopamine's actually spiking because your predictions are increasingly accurate. So that's the steep part of the S. And then in mastery, the dopamine's flat. So you've got slow at the launch point, or the feeling of slow. In the sweet spot, it's the growth is fast and it feels fast. And then in mastery, the growth slows. So you've got slow and then fast and then slow. Now, breaking that down further, if you look at the launch point, what you have is the first stage is the explorer phase. And you've alluded to that, Anne, is this place of, okay, here I am on this new S curve. I chose to be here or I didn't choose to be here. And now I have to decide if I want to stay here longer. So you do some exploration. You ask yourself questions like, is this in sync with my identity? Right. Is this, do I believe that I can be successful here? Is it familiar, but also novel? And if you can answer yes to those questions, then you say, okay, I'm not going to leave this island yet. I'm going to stay a little bit longer, see if I can collect. So it's time to move. And I'm going to see if I can collect the resources that I need. Is there a product market fit, if you will, for me? Can I get the resources and then move into that tipping point of going into the sweet spot? And in the sweet spot, what happens is first you're in accelerator phase. And the experience you're having here is, if you look at self-determination theory, you have this, I use this acronym CAR. So you feel this sense of competence when you're in the sweet spot. You feel a sense of autonomy. I have control over what I'm doing, and a relatedness to the people you're doing it with and to the mission of what you're doing. So that's the feeling you have. But then the go part is the metamorph part, which is where you're starting to go from I run to I am a runner, or I run numbers to I am a CFO. So your identity is shifting, and it's the metamorphosis, and you complete that, and then you get to the top of the curve, which is the mastery phase, which also has two phases. Number one, it's the anchor, and this is the place where you can think, I'm at the top of the mountain, and you want to pause there. It's ephemeral, but you want to say to yourself, look at what I did. I accomplished this, and your identity transformation is complete. You are a runner. You are a CFO, and you know it's kind of sad because you can't stay there forever because you're going to need more dopamine. But you lock in the gains, if you will, and then it's time for you to go to the Mountaineer Phase, which is the place where you say this is either a summit, but not the summit. So you keep climbing, or you find a new S curve to climb. And so you have that challenge. You're in search of more dopamine. And so you move to a new curve or find a way to push yourself back into the sweet spot. And this ability to complete this entire growth cycle from launch point to mastery is what I term a peak performer. It's not just in the sweet spot. A peak performer is a person who can navigate launch points, who is able to maintain momentum through the sweet spot. And when you reach mastery, and mastery might be, I wanted to learn how to play 5 songs on the ukulele. But when you do that and you've achieved what you meant to do, then you don't stay there. You don't stagnate. Right. Like you were saying earlier, Annie, you go and do something new. And that is how you become a peak performer. You know how to complete the growth cycle.
Where do you go when you're getting to the end of your dream? To find another dream.
I know. Well, you talked a little bit about that, Whitney, in explaining the mountaineering phase. So say you're climbing Everest or whatever our personal Everest may be, hiring, the next round of employees. And what did you say at 24,000 feet, there's that danger zone. Mm-hmm. And so, you're almost to the summit, you've crested, you're on a high, and is that in the mastery phase? But there's a little danger there that, okay, you start to be complacent or you don't pay attention to things that you do know, but you're maybe too euphoric, and that can be a danger zone before you get on up to your next summit or whatever that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So for mountain climbers, it's 26,000 feet is the death zone. So you're basically so high up, your brain and your body start to die. There's just not enough oxygen. Right. And so the analogy is that for us as individuals, if we are on top of a curve and we stay there too long, because we're no longer learning, we're no longer forming new neural pathways, right, our brain literally starts to die. So learning becomes the oxygen of human growth.
Love that.
But you have this paradox, or not this paradox, this dilemma, because on the one hand, you look and you say, here I am. I did it. Queen of the mountain, king of the mountain. I'm going to stay here forever. And there's also this feeling of, I don't want to keep moving because that's going to be hard work if I have to keep moving. And yet, if you're not growing, like you said, grow or go. If you're not growing, you die. You know that you have to continue. And so that's the dilemma that we face. And I believe that because growth is our default setting, if we don't choose to continue to grow and we don't find a way to find a new curve or move back in the sweet spot, it's usually because, sometimes it's because we're lazy, but I think it's usually because there's some type of fear of something. And so that's what holds us back. So if we're not growing, what's holding us back, knowing that growth is our default setting?
Oh.
I see wheels turning here.
I think there are a lot of people against growth, if that makes sense.
And you mean personal or within a company?
Professional, sort of like, why aren't you ever happy? Why aren't you ever satisfied? Why do we have to continue to innovate? Why do we have to continue to push boundaries? Why do we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable? I don't know for the masses, Whitney, what that may be minority wise, but I know, success to me is in sort of achieving not only what I didn't think I could do, but what I didn't think I could build and grow in other people to do. Yeah. And the teams, and I thought when I'm very impulsive, I'm spontaneous, but I'm very thoughtful and considered. And when you said, there's not a time frame on it. It's not 2 days. It's not 2 years. It's not, I thought, wow, right? It happens when it's supposed to happen, yet that's counterintuitive to I make things happen. So I just think there's people very, very adverse to change. And again, I don't understand that.
Yeah. And so what I would say to you, the reason I think it's either fear or laziness or something, have you ever met any 1-year-old on the planet that did not want to walk?
Touche. No.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
Or a puppy that doesn't want to play, right? I mean, right.
There isn't. Yeah. There isn't. And so what that says to me is that there gets to be all this gobbledygook, this incrustation, and that if we can clear it out, you will find. I remember having a conversation with an executive who said to me, 90% of my people aren't on an S curve. And I said, oh, no, they are. Everyone's on an S curve. The question is, do they believe that they can move along that curve, or have they gotten stuck somehow? And so that's the question that we want to solve for.
They need a good power wash, Ann.
Well, they need a good leader, an executive, to be demonstrating to them, like you said, to
They do get gunked up.
So I feel like we have two narratives going on. Our own responsibility to disrupt ourselves and explore what that looks like, and it could be within our profession or simultaneous to our profession. But then it's imperative, those who want to lead successful companies, to be able to grow and support your team, hence, how to grow your people. If you have that peak performer, Whitney, like, making sure you yourself may be a peak performer too, but making sure they are lifted up and given all the tools and resources, either to start a new line of business for your company or just
grow yourself, grow your people, grow your company. That's one of the first notes I wrote down.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why, it's very much, as you're pointing out, it's a both and. It's a both and.
Yeah.
You'll have to find a way to play with that one.
Yes.
But the fundamental unit of growth is the individual. But if you think about this, so you think about a mountain, right? So you want to know where you are in your growth, and you also want, tools in your backpack to move up, and that's where the personal disruption comes. But the weather patterns matter. If it's snowing, it's going to be a lot harder to summit a mountain than it is if it's a sunny day. And the thing that I think for me that if you look in the chapter 7, the ecosystem chapter, is we tend to think, okay, well, is the ecosystem conducive to my growth? And that's a question we want to be asking if you're trying to grow. But as a manager, as a colleague, the question I think we need to ask is, all right, I'm the keystone species in this situation. I am the person I'm the person and other people's growth is dependent on me. Okay, let's see if I can get that out of my mouth. And so I become the weather pattern. I become the keystone species. And so what am I doing to help people grow? Right. But again, it's a both and I would flip it. If you as a manager are not helping people grow, even though you want to, then I would come back to there's some element of fear or there's some stuckness of somehow if I help this person grow and if I help this person get up the mountain, does that mean I won't be able to either? Right. And so it comes back to that piece. And if we can start to unpack that, then we can dislodge that and move forward as an individual, but also as a manager.
Okay, curveball. And I'm just thinking as you're talking, have you discovered any difference in the progress of the S curve with male and female? Any different propensity to disrupt or to achieve different levels of the S curve if you're a male or a female?
Yeah. So here's what I would say.
Or observational, doesn't have to be,
observations. Yeah. So here are some observations, and this is me putting together two data points. So we know that women tend to feel like they need to be 100% qualified to apply for a job, and men maybe 60 or 70%. So what does that mean? That means that when you're at the top of an S curve, a man is more willing to jump than a woman. Well, actually, let me reverse it. I'm more willing to hire a man than I am. No, sorry. Let me back up. A man's more willing to jump than a woman because a woman's going to say, well, my parachute's only 60% packed and it has to be 100% packed. And the man's like, well, mine's 60% packed. I'm going. And so when you get to the top, a woman's more likely to say, I don't know. I might need to wait. The other thing that happens is because we judge men on potential and women on track records, then we're more likely to get a man who's further along. He's earlier along the S curve than a woman, and we're more likely to hire a woman who's a little bit more qualified. So she's going to move into the sweet spot more quickly. And so those are some things that you can think about as you're managing men versus women along the curve.
Right. No, good observation.
And just like that. There's a minute and a half left.
Okay, Whitney. Yeah. So clearly she's come back like at least one, maybe two more times. Yeah. I just got started. I wanted to read something from your book, Whitney, that stood out to me because we do creative work for clients. So, we're public relations and creative. So this is under the thrill of the climb. And number 3, create, don't compete. If you're focusing on creating rather than competing, you will always win. The best of life is not found in the rare moments of mountaintop accomplishment, but in the everyday effort of joyful learning and growth. So that's just wicked smart. I mean, that's awesome. So can you, do you want to share a few tips, Whitney, of whether on your own disruption journey or through your 4th book, Smart Growth, a few business vitamins that you feel are tips people could apply at whatever level in their profession they are?
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to give 4 quick tips. So for people, when you've got someone at the launch point of the S curve, what you know is that they feel awkward and uncomfortable and gangly and unsure. And so what you want to think about is, how do I provide these individuals with support? It could be words of encouragement. It could be training. It could be feedback so that they can course correct quickly. For people in the sweet spot, you want to recognize that everything's working. And so you can very quickly ignore them because everything's working. And so important to focus on them, to say thank you, to acknowledge the good work that they're doing, and continue to stretch them so they continue to grow. And then people in mastery, sometimes they'll stop working as hard because they're getting a little bit bored. Give them some grace and understand that that's what's going on, and then find ways to challenge them, whether it's with you in your organization or them going to another organization. In either case, you win and the organization wins. And then the 4th thing I would say, and this is going to sound very simple, but I think it's still very important, which is, when you understand this S curve, the launch point, the sweet spot, mastery, you have this mental model in your brain. It's going to help you navigate your life. It's going to help you be willing to do new things. It's going to give you this map to think about what growth looks like. And so when you're afraid to do something new and you're not good at it, you can just say, this is normal. It's not that I won't be good at it. It is normal, the experience that I'm having. And so having that S curve as a model for growth normalizes your experience and therefore increases your capacity to grow.
Simple, not easy.
No,
simple, not easy.
I loved all of those. And I think as we come out of the pandemic, to your point of this, burst of euphoria, we had the roaring 20s after the 1918 Spanish flu. So I think we're ready to embrace all kinds of change and disruption. Whitney, where can our listeners find you? Share some of your socials, your website. Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, I think that the easiest way, since this is a podcast and I have a podcast, is to look for the Disrupt Yourself podcast. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. You can also sign up for my newsletter, whitneyjohnson.com/newsletter. I do respond. If you get the newsletter and you email me, I will respond to that. Might take me a couple of weeks, but I do. And then obviously you can buy the book wherever books are sold.
Good. No, we love it. We love learning all about you. And so we generally, for Grit and Gravitas, we have a meetup reception celebration in Hershey. So you're on our list for our next one coming up. So hopefully we can get together. We're not far away. Virginia is not far from Pennsylvania.
Not that far away, and it's always a good weekend in Hershey, Whitney. So
thank you so much, Whitney, for sharing your wisdom and all your incredible learning. You are a thought leader, a big thinker, and we're excited to have you in our circle of influence now.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Annie.
Cheers and have a high gear day. Thanks for listening. It's our desire that these stories will bring energy, ideas, and fresh thinking that you can use today. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram, and have a high gear day.